ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have some fun. Well, we always have fun here, but we're going to have fun, and we're going to learn a lot about this power of the purse, about government shutdowns. You're going to learn more and know more by the time I'm done than anybody else in America. And I think that's one of the differences about this program. Although there are many great programs out there, you know. First, I want you to hear a former congressman newly elected to the Senate in Colorado, which the establishment tells us this guy's the future. His name's Cory Gardner, Republican, Colorado. And he goes on MSLSD on the Morning Schmo show. And, of course, the question's predictable. The questioner is a moron. The answer's predictable. But I am going to give you information that neither of them have and that you need to have. Cut 4, go.
Unfortunately, there are some voices out there that Mitch McConnell doesn't appreciate.
Stop. Well, then we ought to stop talking because Mitch McConnell doesn't appreciate it, according to the Morning Schmo, who can barely put together a sentence. Failed on radio. He's failed on TV, too. That's why he's on MSLSD. Go ahead.
Government shutdown. Is there any way you could support a government shutdown or a default on the debt?
Stop. A default on the debt. This moron was a congressman. Now, I'm going to demonstrate that he's a moron and that you know more than he does in just a minute. Because there have been almost 20 government shutdowns and there's never been a default on the debt. But he can't help it. He's a toady. Go ahead.
As Mitch McConnell was saying yesterday, there's no way he ever could.
No, absolutely not. There's no time, place, or purpose of a government shutdown or default. That's simply ridiculous and something that a mature governing body doesn't even contemplate. So over the next several weeks, over the next several days, as we put together that agenda, those first 100 days of accomplishments for the American people, we ought to make it very clear that that's simply not acceptable.
This guy's very painful. What was he, a weatherman before? Mr. Badu, doesn't he sound like that? Hey, everybody, you know the weather. Well, anyway, I'm not impressed. I'm not impressed with this guy. I'm certainly not impressed with the schmo. Now, let's begin our trip down memory lane, and I will demonstrate that they don't know what they're talking about. As a matter of fact, they're both irresponsible. As a matter of fact, Mitch McConnell's irresponsible. There was a piece last year, and it wasn't bad. Not perfect, but it wasn't bad, by the Washington Compost. And they went through every modern government shutdown. Every modern government shutdown. And we're going to do that right now. Because you're going to see it's not only not irresponsible, it's utterly responsible. It's one of the few ways to control spending, and I might say there was never a government shutdown under Bush 41 or Bush 43. There were government shutdowns under Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, several under Reagan, and of course this last time around. Because there's no other way to control spending than the modern era. And of course, the Morning Schmo and this newly elected, newly minted Cory Gardner, they won't tell you how they're going to cut spending. They won't tell you how they're going to control a rogue president who is destroying our constitutional system. They have no answer. I watched the Fox News the other day. I'm watching Charles Krauthammer. He's going on and on how outrageous it is what Obama's going to do. Obamacare, immigration. But he said, everybody calm down. Calm down. Forget about the power of the purse. Forget about shutting down the government. Come on, we can do this. Do what? Do what? If you listen to these people, Democrat, Republican, media, politician, you would think that only last year was the government ever shut down. And you would think a government shutdown results in defaulting on the debt. They're both absolute lies. Let's get started. Shutdown number 1, September 30 to October 11. Almost 2 weeks. It was 10 days. The president, Gerald Ford. The Democrats controlled heavily the Senate and the House. Why? The major budget conflict during this period came because Ford vetoed a funding bill for the Departments of Labor and HEW at the time, which is HHS now. He said they weren't restraining spending. What happened? Congress overrode Ford's veto on October 1, so the spending bills took effect. But it wasn't until over a week later that the partial shutdown ended, and it was only on October 11 that a continuing resolution ending funding gaps was passed. So the first time was under Gerald Ford in modern times, since the Budget Act. And it lasted 10 days because he wanted to cut spending. The next government shutdown, number 2, lasted 12 days. It was under Jimmy Carter. And the Democrats controlled the Senate and the House. Significantly, the Senate 59-41. The Majority Leader, Robert Byrd. Tip O'Neill in the House. They had 292 seats, the Democrats. So why was it shut down? Well, the Democrats in the House insisted on continuing the ban, the House insisted on continuing the ban on using Medicaid dollars to pay for abortions, except in cases where the life of the mother was at stake. The Senate wanted to loosen this to include allowances for abortions in case of rape and incest, or when the mother's health was in danger. The issue had become tied to funding for labor and HEW. They couldn't come to an agreement. So how was it resolved? The Medicaid ban was continued until October 31, and the shutdown ended to give negotiators more time to work out a deal. Well, they couldn't work out a deal, so the government shut down again for 8 more days, a total of 20 days. Not enough time had elapsed since the temporary measure ending the shutdown. So how was it resolved? Another temporary bill was signed by Carter to allow for more time for Congress to resolve its abortion dispute. Notice, the debt was paid. The debt was paid. There wasn't a default on the debt. Shutdown number 4. Jimmy Carter again. They still couldn't resolve this issue. This lasted another 8 days. It was a second temporary measure ending a shutdown meant to allow more time for negotiations, but it wasn't enough time. How was it resolved? A deal was brokered in which the exception allowing Medicaid to pay for abortions in cases where the mother's life is in danger was widened to include abortions from rape or incest, or which are necessary to protect the mother's health. Okay? 3 times in a row it was shut down over abortion for a total of 28 days. We didn't default on our debt. Mr. Gardner, Morning Schmo, why are you lying about this? Government shutdown number 5. Who was president? Jimmy Carter. Again, the Democrats had massive majorities in the House and the Senate. This was September 30 to October 18. 18 days. Congress passed a defense bill including funding for a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. Carter judged the carrier wasteful and vetoed it. He vetoed a public works appropriation bill because of water projects he also considered wasteful. How was it resolved? A new defense bill excluding funding for the carrier was passed, as was a new public works bill excluding the water projects Carter opposed. And the previous year's compromise solution on abortion, in which funding was reserved for cases of rape, incest, and jeopardy to the mother's health, was agreed to in both houses. So it shut down for almost 3 weeks. There was no default on the debt. Life goes on. People my age don't even remember this. Shutdown number 6. Who was the president? Jimmy Carter. How many days did it last? 11. This time the Democrats had 58 senators and 277 House members. Byrd controlled the Senate, O'Neill the House. Overwhelming Democrat numbers. Here's Democrats fighting with Democrats. Why did it happen? Well, the House wanted to raise congressional and senior civil servant pay by 5.5%, which the Senate opposed. So the House also wanted to limit federal abortion spending to cases where the mother's life was in danger, while the Senate wanted to keep the funding in case of rape, incest, and when the mother's health is in serious jeopardy. The dispute was not resolved before a partial shutdown. How was it resolved? After 11 days. Well, the House got the pay increases, but had to allow abortion funding in case of rape and incest. Government shutdown number 7. For 2 days in 1981, the President, Ronald Reagan, who controlled the Senate, the Republicans, 53-47, Howard Baker was the majority leader. Tip O'Neill and the Democrats still controlled the House. Why did it happen? Well, Reagan promised to veto any spending bill that didn't include at least half of his proposed $8.4 billion in domestic budget cuts. Well, the Senate passed a bill that met his specifications, but the House insisted on both greater defense cuts than Reagan wanted and pay raises for itself and for senior-level federal civil servants. Eventually, the House and Senate agreed to pass a package that fell $2 billion short of the cuts Reagan wanted. So Reagan vetoed it and shut down the government. How was it resolved? The House and Senate passed and Reagan signed a bill extending current spending through December 15 to give them time to work it out. Government shutdown number 8. The following year. Same numbers in the Senate and House. Why did it happen? The new fiscal year started and Congress just hadn't passed new spending in time, so parts of the government were forced to shut down. While there were some disagreements over spending levels between the House and the Senate and the administration, they didn't pass a bill. Government shutdown number 9. Lasted 3 days. The President, Ronald Reagan. House and Senate negotiators wanted to fund $5.4 billion and $1.2 billion respectively in public works spending to create jobs, quote unquote. But Reagan threatened to veto any spending bill that included this money. The House also opposed funding the MX missile program, a major defense priority of Ronald Reagan's. How was it resolved? The House and Senate abandoned their jobs plan, but declined to fund the MX missile or the Pershing II missile. They also provided funding for the Legal Services Corporation, which provides legal support, which is a crap agency that funds leftists. Now, I'll explain it. How was it resolved? Reagan criticized all the moves. He grudgingly signed the bill, but warned them, don't send him another bill like this again. I'm not done. I want to get to shutdown number 10 all the way through to number 18. Because, ladies and gentlemen, more than any of these government shutdowns, we are facing today a president of the United States who is eviscerating our Constitution, and we have glib Republicans, including Cory Gardner and McConnell and the Morning Schmo. No government shutdown. We don't want to, default on the debt. They are lying to you. They are lying to you. These Republicans today are not even as strong as the Republicans of the past. I'll be right back.
Mark Levin.
Let's continue with our little ride down history, memory lane, because you won't get it anywhere else, and you need context for what's going on in this country. The French Republicans surrendering everywhere, even before they have to. Shutdown number 10, and you will notice most of these shutdowns occurred under Ronald Reagan. And you will also notice most of the phony Bush budget cutters, because they didn't cut budgets. There were no shutdowns in under Bush 41 or 43, and that they pretend that their RINO Republican mentality is better than the Reagan mentality because Reagan never cut. Reagan tried desperately, as you can see, time and time and time again. Other than defense and certain other programs, to cut domestic spending, particularly discretionary spending. And discretionary spending under Reagan went down almost 10%. And he had to use threats of government shutdowns and the shutdown itself. He didn't campaign on it. He wasn't bragging about it. But when the power of the purse is surrendered to a president, like the Republicans are doing now, a president who is exercising Article 1 congressional power when it comes to immigration, who lied his way into the Obamacare debacle. The fact that these Republicans won't stand up in Congress, I'm trying to tell you, is not natural. It's not normal. Shutdown number 10. The Republicans controlled the Senate 55-45. Baker was the leader. And the Democrats still controlled the House. The House Democrats passed an amendment adding close to $1 billion in education spending. They also cut foreign aid below what Reagan wanted, adding money for Israel and Egypt but cutting it for Syria and El Salvador, and cut defense spending by $11 billion relative to Reagan's request. The dispute wasn't resolved before a short shutdown of 3 days. Well, what resolved it? The House Democrats agreed to reduce their education spending request by $100 million. They also funded the MX missile, which they refused to fund during the last shutdown. But they kept their foreign aid and defense cuts and got a ban on oil and gas leasing in federal animal refuges. I want you to hear a few more. Shutdown number 11 under Reagan. Shutdown number 12 under Reagan. Shutdown number 13 under Reagan. Shutdown number 14 under Reagan. Shutdown number 15. Well, it is George H.W. Bush. I'll be right back.
This is America's Constitutional Convention, the Mark Levin Show. Call in now, 877-381-3811.
Yeah, we'll not be shutting the government down, threatening to default on the national debt.
No, absolutely not. There's no time, place, or purpose of a government shutdown or default. That's simply ridiculous and something that a mature
right,
governing...
That's enough. That's our new senator from Colorado. Unfortunately, sounds ridiculous. He has no idea what the history of these budget battles have been. The Republicans like to say, oh, we're all Reaganites, out of one side of their mouths, and then out of the other side of their mouths they say, forget Reagan. Yeah, we're all Bushies now. The battle over the power of the purse, the battle over spending and budgets, particularly since the Budget Act of 1974, these have been fierce battles. But at no time has Congress surrendered the power of the purse except today. And they're surrendering the power of the purse in the face of the most despotic president in modern American history. They are surrendering the power that they have. They're embracing their own impotence in responding to a president who is going to order the legalization of illegal aliens by the millions in defiance of the Constitution, who's going to do the same when it comes to treaty requirements under the Constitution with Iran, whose government's doing the same thing with the EPA, and you heard the old fool who's the Republican leader in the Senate and one of the young fools who just came in telling you, no, that wouldn't be mature. We can do better than this. No, we can't. You use the tools the Constitution gives you. Governing is hard if you do it right. Shutdown number 11. 2 days, Ronald Reagan. What happened? Passage of a spending bill was contemplated by the House, linking it to a crime-fighting package, which Reagan wanted, and a water projects package, which he opposed. And the Senate's tying it to a civil rights measure, which Reagan also opposed, that would have reversed a Supreme Court ruling. Reagan offered to forego his crime bill in exchange for junking the water package and that so-called civil rights provision, but a deal wasn't reached. What happened? 3-day spending extension was passed and signed so the parties could keep negotiating. 1984. What happened? Well, the 3-day extension wasn't long enough. Congress relented, and the water projects were stripped from a spending bill, as was the so-called civil rights measure. They passed a crime package along the lines that Reagan had wanted. And a compromise was worked out on funding for the Nicaragua Contras. Government shutdown number 13. An effort to expand welfare. 1986, for 1 day. Who was the majority leader in the Senate? Bob Dole. Still Tip O'Neill controlled the House. What happened? Well, the 1-day shutdown followed several disagreements between Reagan and O'Neill in the House, including over a provision to ban companies from creating subsidiaries to get around labor contracts. This is the way the Post writes it. How was it resolved? House Democrats gave up a number of their demands, secured a promise for a vote on their welfare expansion, and returned passed appropriations to reopen the government. Shutdown number 14. 1 day. Ronald Reagan. Who controlled the Senate? Bob Byrd and the Democrats. The House? Jim Wright and the Democrats. What happened? Reagan and congressional Democrats could not agree on funding for the Nicaragua Contras. You know this issue. Democrats also pushed for a provision reinstating the Fairness Doctrine, requiring that broadcasters give equal airtime, whatever. Democrats yielded on the Fairness Doctrine, and a deal was worked out for non-lethal aid to the Contras. Shutdown number 15. This is the one time, I apologize. I want to make sure I get it accurate. 1990, 3 days under George H.W. Bush. The Democrats controlled the Senate under George Mitchell, and the Democrats controlled the House under Tom Foley. What happened? Bush refused to sign any continuing resolution into law unless it was paired with a deficit reduction plan, and backed up the pledge by vetoing one that made it to his desk. The House failed to override his veto, and it wasn't resolved before the shutdown. How was it resolved? Well, the House and Senate adopted a joint budget resolution providing an outline for reducing the deficit, and Bush then signed the continuing resolution. Of course, they lied, and Bush would go on to raise taxes. Shutdown number 16, Clinton versus Gingrich. By the way, you notice, everybody, there was no default on the national debt? You notice that? Because there's months and months and months of money available to deal with the national debt during these disputes. And to hear Mitch McConnell and this Cory Gardner use this as an excuse not to do their job, not to follow their oath, not to stand up to this imperial president is such a loathsome outrage. Somebody needs to ask them. Somebody needs to ask the morning schmo, ask Rohem. Somebody needs to ask these senators, how would this endanger our payments on the debt? We've gone through this before. I've talked about this before. Clinton versus Gingrich, shutdown 1995. Bob Dole ran the Senate. Republicans controlled the House. Shutdown was for 5 days. The Republican Congress sent Clinton a continuing resolution that would have raised Medicare premiums, committed the president to balance the budget within 7 years. See, this is the only way you can get liberals to do things. And curtailed so-called environmental regulations. He vetoed it, triggering a shutdown. So how was it resolved? Well, the shutdown was ended when Clinton, Gingrich, and Dole reached an agreement to fund the government at 75% levels for 4 weeks while budget negotiations continued. Clinton also agreed to the 7-year balanced budget timeline. All the liberals and Democrats run around praising Clinton. He balanced the budget. Yeah, with a proverbial political gun at his head, thanks to Gingrich and the boys. And this clown, the morning schmo, he likes to run around and say he was the real fiscal conservative. Well, did he support this shutdown or not? Workers furloughed during the shutdown were eventually given back pay. Shutdown number 17, Clinton versus Gingrich, for 21 days, 1995 into 96. The Republicans controlled Congress, which, by the way, they would hold. They would hold for quite some time. I want to remind you the Republicans controlled Congress for the first 6 years of George W. Bush's administration and then lost it. And I'm pointing this out for a reason, because these same people who have advised George W. Bush, Karl Rove, Michael Gerson, Pete Wehner, they're still around, insisting that conservatives surrender, that we're dogmatic, that we're purists, when in fact it is they who are dogmatic and purists for big government. These are progressive Republicans. That's what they are. They're progressives. Why did this shutdown happen? Republican leaders demanded the White House propose a 7-year budget plan that balanced the budget when using the Congressional Budget Office's economic forecast rather than OMB's, which were more optimistic, and OMB, of course, was controlled by Clinton. In the end, the Republicans passed legislation to keep the government open. Clinton, in turn, submitted a budget that the CBO said balanced the budget within 7 years. That's how they got control over spending. And the government was shut down for 21 days. And the last time the government was shut down was last year for 16 days. And the Republicans immediately went on the attack. Mitch McConnell, John Boehner, their mouthpieces on Fox, their mouthpieces in talk radio, their mouthpieces who write columns and blogs, smearing Ted Cruz, smearing Mike Lee, in the middle of the battle, stabbing them in the back. John McCain, trashing them. Corker of Tennessee, trashing them. Behind closed doors, treating them as persona non grata. And now we're told they don't qualify for the offices they hold or any higher office because of this irresponsible act they took. And the Republicans gained 9 seats in the Senate and over a dozen seats in the House, a massive number of seats in state legislatures, several governorships. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no other way to control spending when you have a radical leftist as president than the power of the purse. That's common sense. There's no other way to attempt to control a lawless president who brazenly is violating the Constitution of the United States than the power of the purse if you're not going to impeach him. When you have the incoming Senate Majority Leader, a Republican, and one of the new Republicans from Colorado, Cory Gardner, mocking those who talk about the power of the purse, mocking those who seek ways to control this president, when the country's going to hell, when the economy's going to hell, when debt is going through the roof, when this man is trying to change the country, fundamentally transform it, opening the borders wide open, millions of people getting legalization. I want to remind you, when that happens, what the hell do you think's going to happen on the border the day after that? A man who uses the executive branch to rewrite our marriage laws. A man who uses the executive branch to attack industries and rewrite our clean air and clean water laws. A man who has used the executive branch to rewrite our sentencing guidelines. A man who has nothing but contempt for the Constitution and the other branches of government. I asked Mitch McConnell and Cory Gardner, and I ask all of these people, what the hell are you going to do about it? They're not going to do anything about it. They're not going to use the power of the purse. They weren't even burned last time when they were led by courageous Ted Cruz and Mike Lee and courageous certain House members. Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, 41 once, Bill Clinton, all used either the power of the purse or fought the power of the purse through the government shutdown process. It's not ideal, but it's all we have when dealing with a radical, out-of-control president who's pulling this country down day in and day out and fundamentally altering our constitutional system. Every example I just gave to you doesn't even come close to the circumstances we face today. They use the power of the purse for a host of reasons that I just read to you. Do you think these same people would use the power of the purse to try and keep an imperial president under control? You bet they would. I can only conclude two things. The Republicans who are in power today support amnesty because their benefactors support amnesty. That is, the big industrialists and the corporatists, the casino magnates, the media magnates, the Home Depot magnates, you name them. And they want cheap labor, and they want a lot of it. The hell with America, the hell with the citizenry, the hell with the rule of law. And these are the men and these are the industries that fund their campaigns and give them their power. That's number one. Number two, when it comes to Obamacare, I think it's quite clear now that the Republicans embrace the vast majority of it. They want to deliver the reversal of the medical equipment tax, the medical device tax, because that is a big issue with lobbyists. It has almost zero effect on you. But they'll do very little else. They'll do these show efforts, these show votes. But the minute they pass an omnibus bill, which means this massive spending bill, which they're pushing for early December, the first